As we were preparing for the panel, it was really interesting to hear from Sherry about how she hears back from users of the Mary Baker Eddy Library materials. And that's like wonderful that you already get feedback and have that dialogue and interaction.
That's right. I mean, our project is so new, so I really should start with a thank you to digital projects that have gone before us. I mean, particularly the folks at the Massachusetts Historical Society, that they have been so kind to us as we put our pilot project together. And I like the word promise, because I'm hoping that's what the pilot represents, is that it sort of illustrates what's possible. Because Mary Baker Eddy's papers, we're talking 28,000 documents, the letters, the manuscripts, drafts of her published writings, and but our pilot is just, could fit on the head of a pin by comparison. But hopefully it proves the concept that to show what is possible. And people have been looking at scans of the original documents, and they've been looking at transcriptions in the research room. But what we're offering now is an answer to the #1 question we've gotten, which is, how can I access this from home? So that's, I think, the first way we're engaging with our audience, is we're hopefully finally saying, well, yes, you can. So I'm going to walk you through what the project looks like and address a few of these issues, the problems and the payoff. And hopefully you'll agree by the end that the promise is there. So our main screen here, and if you look at the bottom, you see a click here to send comments and suggestions. And that's really been just the first way that we've started to hear from our users. We only launched in January, so we haven't been around very long. But it's been really nice that people already are starting to engage, and either they're finding transcription errors, or they have suggestions of maybe a document is actually related to another document. And so it's been really helpful. Or if, frankly, if they'll find a typo, I'm thrilled if they'll take the time to send that to me, and I can make the correction. And so we selected the sermons as sort of our first effort, and we did it for a couple of reasons. One, we thought it really spoke to the library's broad audience. That on the one hand, we have this wonderful core of church members, but we also have, as the papers have become available, a very interested public and an interested group of scholars who want to make use of these papers. And so we're trying to find a way to speak to this diverse audience and make the papers useful for everyone. And I think in some ways it was where we started to encounter maybe our first problem. So while the sermons were a wonderful choice in many ways, as I'll show you in slides a little bit later, they were kind of a complex choice. We sort of picked our hardest documents right off the top, which I guess that was good. Some days I thought it was not a very good idea. But the transcriptions were very difficult. The documents are heavily edited. They're very long. They're very dense. And so they sort of brought their own problems. And many of them were not identified within the collection itself. And so that was sort of my first job, was just figuring out what is a sermon. And we had, but I think there's great payoff in that. I feel like we're getting to know our collection a lot better by really spending a lot of time with it. And so a lot of documents that had never been identified as anything other than a miscellaneous article, I can now say with confidence, actually that was a sermon. I can give you the date. I can tell you the place. And I even have this other document that's related to it. So you come in, this is the first search screen here, title, date, the unique identifying number, the accession number, the type. And even here we were already starting to think about our audience a bit, and the fact that we're using an editorial title, which is something that we're assigning to each document. And there is a way, or sometimes, Eddy has used titles in the sermons themselves, and we can just use that, but not everything has a title. But we just were trying to think, I think as Neil brought up, is sort of, how you need to give people an access point, and just saying, pick your unique identifying number wasn't very helpful. But if we can give you a title, then you're starting to get a sense of subject, and, you can say, oh, that's a Bible verse, that I'm interested in. And so we're going to look at this sermon, Children, Have Ye Any Meat? And just to point out, this is kind of an interesting and, again, sort of complex one, because she didn't address this topic just one time, but we know of at least 3 different sermons where she preached on that Bible verse. And so sometimes that presented a challenge of knowing, which document goes with which date. And in some cases, we're not totally sure, and we're happy to say that when we think that, Mrs. Eddy she was very smart, that if she had a file on one thing, she certainly wouldn't hesitate to revisit that file the next time she's going to preach on that topic. So if we go in here, this is the screen that you come to, and I'll just give you a quick overview of the screen before we go into the details of it. And everything is on one screen, which was new for us, to be able to have the transcription, to be able to have the scan of the original right on the same page, to have related images on the same page, and to have, most importantly for this project, is annotation, is to start to give people some way markers as they are exploring the collection. I think at first when I was saying annotation, I should have learned pretty quickly that people were like, yeah, whatever that means. And I would get sort of a nice, like, that's nice, dear. But so finally it's like, these are the footnotes. This is that explanation you want, that historical context, that background, just to give you a little bit of information as you're making your way through the documents. So this page, for me, really starts to stitch our collection together. So instead of siloing our different collections, where letters always live here, historic photographs live over here, maybe maps or, even a totally different department, that we're starting to bring them together in a way that tells an actual story. So for example, just by offering the people who were involved in making this document, and in our project, any time you see something in teal, that's your signal that you can click on it and get more information. So for example, you can click on Mary Baker Eddy, you just jump down the page again, a little bit, you'll get a photograph of her and a brief bio. And we try to do that wherever possible, so you can just stay right on the page, though. You don't have to go to a different place to be able to get this information. And it can be really helpful for minor players. For example, if she's just writing, dear student, we can tell you who the student was. And if we're imagining sort of a global audience, even the major players need some biographical detail. So, people who are totally new to the subject, can feel like they're starting off, it's not totally fresh. They can get a little bit of content right away. So here, just to talk more about the metadata that's offered at the top, you can click on these little plus signs that you see right here, and you open those up, and you can get just a little more information about either a description of the document, or in this case, an editorial note that tells you where the sermon was given. And we can click on, again, Chickering Hall is in teal, so that tells us that we can get more content about it. So we can get a photo, as well as just a little description of what it was like, the address that was on Tremont Street here. And you can also see that there's related versions, for example, that we're trying to bring the collection together, that if we know that there's a related document, we want to give you an easy way to get to it. And we're also, if there's even a related topic, that for some of them they're drafts of the same thing, but for other things, they just might be on the same topic. Like she might mention, this same sermon in a letter, for example. But I'm going to show you one that's just a related, we're going to go to this A10642B, which happens to be a draft of the benediction. she gave at the end of this sermon. And it just opens in a new tab, so you can toggle back and forth. You don't lose where you were. You can easily go back and forth between that sermon and this benediction. And just to show you on that same document, the Christian Science Journal was in teal. One of the things we've done in these, what they call the gazetteers, we have like a glossary of terms. Since there's a lot of terminology in Christian Science, a lot of abbreviations get used in these documents, we wanted to have a place where we could just sort of keep a running list. And titles like this, for example, so you could know, when the magazine started and so forth, just to give you just a snapshot of information right while you're in the moment. And the idea is that then if users want something more in depth, then they can go and do that research. But at least, right on the page, they can get something so they can keep going. Just to talk about then the kind of annotation that happens within the text of the document itself, one thing that became really important as I was talking about this project early on is the difference between annotation, so that context, that historical information that we want to give, and how that's different from interpretation. I think particularly with a religious figure like Eddy, there was some concern that we were going to be somehow interpreting the documents for people. And we don't have any interest in doing that at all. We want to make the documents accessible, and so then people can come to their own conclusions about the content that they contain. But some of the annotation that we are doing is Bible verses that we were able to encode the Bible verses that often she is making allusions to the Bible. I mean, frankly, her sermons are one after another. She was so steeped in the Bible, and obviously her audience was too, that she can make these references, and people then were apparently really comfortable with it. But today, we thought it would be really helpful if you could just have access to the King James right on the page. And so all you have to do is click, and the verse will pop up. The other kinds of annotation that we're putting on the inside is like a note from the archivist about the handwriting. So we can do handwriting changes. This one's making the point that you may want to go see the original because what you're seeing now is written on a lightly erased hand. So the documents themselves can get very complex, but we can make note about that for the user. We also are taking misspellings, and we're correcting them so that you can find them in a keyword search, but we still want to give people access to how it was originally spelled. And so you can just see it in a pop-up, as written. We're doing the same thing with expansions of abbreviated words so that you can get the full word. So I'm going to move to that related document, that benediction that goes with the sermon. Again, you can see the Bible verse and general footnotes too. Had there just been an unusual term or something like that, we would have defined it. Or had there been an event that just needed a little bit more historical context, we would give those as well. But what I want to talk about next is that original scan. And so you can click on that and you can open it. It gets larger right on the same page. And then it allows you can click through the individual pages of the scan. And I'm going to bring it up just so you can see what the transcription looks like. So now I'm going to divide the room, and I'm going to test you on your ability to transcribe. No, I just wanted you to see that how complex it can be, that you have a lot of cross-outs, insertions, things are moving around the page, and it sometimes can make it very difficult. In the end, what is a transcription? How do you honor this document? And that's one of the reasons we really like having the original, is that no matter how hard we try in a transcription, it's always good to be able to look at the original thing. And as Neil pointed out, you can see them digitally in many ways better than you can see the actual thing. I mean, obviously, we're preserving the original by only showing you, an electronic version of it. No one's handling it. It's not seeing the light of day, et cetera. But I think in many ways, these are almost easier to read. You can manipulate them more. I think putting the light behind it with the screen, which is something you would never do to an original, I think really helps as well. So everybody got that? You've read that one and committed it to memory? Good. Okay, good job. All right. So one of the things that we really thought about, and again, thinking about our audience, is how we wanted to present those transcriptions, because we knew we were dealing with often heavily edited manuscripts, but we knew that we had individuals that were going to want to read for meaning. Church members in particular, they're wanting to get some metaphysical meaning from these things, but it can be hard to do when you're stuck with so many deletions and insertions, and it's really hard to follow the actual line of thought in the document. And I had seen a variation done by the Newton Project, and where they use a normalized versus a diplomatic view of some journals. And we were able to sort of use a version of that for our transcription. So the default is what we call the final edits. It's our best effort at what we think is Eddy's sort of final product. And if you take out the deleted words, you insert all the inserted words, and you can do that silently, we come up with what we call our final edits. But at the same time, though, we know that scholars could really be interested in what are the things that she took out, what it was her editing process. And so you also have this original option. And so there you're seeing what's a more literal transcription, where things have been, you see the deletions, you see the insertions, and so forth. And again, but you always have that original to go back to. And the really great part about working digitally with XML is this is actually the same transcription, and it's just about whether you are suppressing the code or employing the code. And so it's great. It's where I think it looks like it's really hard, like, oh, they made 2 transcriptions. No, we didn't. It's just about what code we're employing or suppressing. And so it's really about now that the payoff, that I think for me the collection comes together. We've stitched together all these different pieces to tell a much more cohesive story. I think that we can offer annotation that's helpful without being intrusive, that we're trying to do it in a way that, click it if you want it, don't click it if you don't. And we're trying to make it succinct enough that it's not overpowering the documents themselves, which is obviously, the most important things. And I can say just from working on it that it gives us a better understanding of Mary Baker Eddy herself. I think particularly as a preacher, it's sort of been an understudied aspect of her life, and something that I think that we don't think about that much, but it was so interesting to learn more about that side of her, and to really get a sense of how did she command an audience. And that sermon that I brought up, you see she starts out, basically, let me set the scene, and she does this beautiful job of, showing that scene between when Jesus comes back and finds the disciples having returned to fishing, and it just was an interesting window to me on how she would command an audience, how she would work her way through the Bible, which obviously her command of the Bible is just incredible. I think that was the one thing that we could really see through all of this, is that it almost just flowed from her in a stream of consciousness sort of way, and that was sort of very exciting to see. And I think the best payoff at all is users all over the world can access this, right from their own homes.